But I have the honor of sharing the scriptures with you today as we continue our series through Ephesians. And today we hit Ephesians chapter 5, and I've got a word that's been burning on my heart for our church. And so I hope you're ready. If you take notes, open your notes up. I want to read to you Ephesians chapter 5, and I want to start actually in the middle of the letter, in the middle of the chapter. I want to begin in verse 14, and it says this, Ephesians 5, verse 14. It says, "This is why it is said, 'Awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light.'" So I want to theme my message today, live as who you are. Live as who you are. And there's something that I want you to know today as we kick off the message. The one thing that I want to make sure that you know today is that how you see yourself, your identity, plays a huge role in the life you live. In other words, who you are comes before what you do. How you see yourself, who you are, plays a huge role in the life you live. As a matter of fact, when the most powerful place to start, when you're trying to make a change, when you're trying to grow as a person, is not in what you do. The most powerful place to start is in who you are. Has anybody tried starting or stopping a new habit this year? Anybody? Anybody? A few people? Okay, raise your hand if you have successfully started a new habit this year. Got a couple? 3? Wow. Okay, that's not much. And I relate. I get it. I a month ago, so before I had my 6-month-old, I was running pretty consistently. A month ago, I told myself, I am going to run again. I'm starting to run again. And I have run twice. So that's how that's going. And now there's accountability, right? Now you can ask me, hey, you running? And that's why I shared it. It was just really for myself. It was totally selfish. But we know how difficult it is to start or stop a new habit, right? It is incredibly, incredibly difficult. As a matter of fact, there was a new study done, and in this study, what they did is they brought in people who were interested in wanting to eat healthier. And so they brought these people in, and they asked them all sorts of questions, and how interested they were, and if this was a relevant goal to them. That they brought them into this room. And to half of the people, they said, all right, so throughout the period of the study, what I want you to do is whenever you're tempted to not eat healthy, to make the opposite of the decision you said you wanted to make, whenever you're tempted, I want you to say, I can't. And to the other half of the people, they said, whenever you feel tempted, whenever you want to eat something unhealthy, we want you to say, I don't. So interesting, they say, I don't. Just keep saying, I don't. And so through the period of the study, they just kept repeating that. Half of the people just kept saying, I can't. The other half of the people kept saying, I don't. And it's interesting in the difference of those statements. One is a statement about what you can or can't do. The other is a statement about yourself, your values, who you are as a person. I because of who I am, I don't do that. And the interesting thing is they found, so they went through the period of the study, and they just asked them a few questions on a questionnaire, and they had them fill it out, and then they had them turn it in, and they thought that was it. They were like, all right, cool, that was the study. But this was actually when it was just beginning. So what they did, they had them fill out this questionnaire, and they had them turn it in, and when they turned it in, they're like, hey, thank you so much for being a part of this study. On your way out, we've got a couple snacks for you that you can take as you're leaving. So just to say thank you so much for coming out. And so they would turn in the questionnaire, thank you so much. They'd go on their way out, and they would have one side a chocolate bar, and on the other side, a health bar. And what this person receiving the questionnaire did is that he would take their questionnaire, basically throw it away, and he would, on a piece of paper, note which option they chose. And the interesting thing that they found is that the people who repeated to themselves, "I don't," were more than twice as likely to make the decision they said was important to them, versus the people who were just focusing on what they can or can't do. And that's just a small study, but the thing is, the scriptures have been saying this all along. It's not about what you do. It starts with who you are. Who you are as a person, how you see yourself, comes before what you do. The habits, the decisions, the life that you lead, the choices that you make. They are all from a foundation of your identity, of who you are, who you see yourself to be as a person. And today we land in Ephesians chapter 5. And this chapter is incredible because you see this incredible connection between who you are and what you do. And so today we're going to read a few portions of chapter 5, and you see the writer. You see him in a beautiful and incredible way. He talks about, hey, this church, follower of Jesus, if you are in the room and you are in Jesus, he says, this is who you are. And he makes statements about your identity, about who you are. And then he says, this is what it means to live that out. So there are a couple in this letter that I want to point out today. And so let's start reading in verse 1, Ephesians 1. It says, imitate God. Therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children, live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. So the first thing you've got to know in this letter about who you are as a follower of Jesus is right there in the verse. It says, you are God's dear child. You are God's dear child. And this is what I have to get you to see here. I want to get you to see that this is not just an aside. This is not just a side remark, but this is where it all starts. This is the foundation, the baseline for everything he's about to talk about in chapter 5. These are the first two verses. He is setting the stage. He is setting us up for everything that he is about to say. And he starts right here. You are a dear child of God. And so that begs the question, how do you see yourself? Who are you? Do you see yourself today as a fully welcomed, loved, fully accepted child of God? Is that who you are? Because it's so easy, and I know this because we are all human. It's so easy for us to see ourselves in so many other ways. You might be here, and the primary way you're seeing yourself in this season is as a failure. You might be in the room and the primary way you're seeing yourself today is not good enough, is as a mess up, is as insecure, as whatever it might be. There are so many different ways that you could see yourself today. But what I need you to know is this, is that you can come to church and you can try as hard as you can to change your behavior, to try to do good, to try to do better, to try to fix yourself up. But if it does not start with seeing yourself as God sees you, as the scriptures say you are, it is going to be an uphill battle. That's frustrating, that's hard, that's confusing, because you will try to change what you do before talking about who you are. And that's not Christianity. Christianity begins with who you are. And I need you to know today that if you are in Jesus, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what you have been telling yourself all week, regardless of what your mistakes have been telling you all week, you today are a dear child of God. That does not change based on your performance. That does not change based on how well you've been a Christian this week or not. That does not change based on your doubts or your belief. That is your identity. That is God-given. That is who you are. That is who you are. Before anything else, before mistakes, before struggles, that is who you are. He goes on to say, I love these verses so much. He goes on to say, he says, live a life of love. Why? Why do we do that? Because we have been loved. He says, live a life of love. Why? Because you have been loved. Because Jesus gave his life for you. And see, I need you to just get that today. If this is all you take, I need you to get that faith, Jesus, Christianity, being who God has made you to be, starts with knowing who you are. It starts with knowing that you are a loved, welcomed, accepted child of God, regardless how you feel. That is who you are. And that is the truth. It starts there. But it doesn't end there. He goes on. And he's going to talk about, what does this mean for our lives? What does this mean for the way that I live? Because see, who you are comes before what you do, but who you are also has great implications for what you do. It informs what you do. It informs who you are and what you do. And so he's about to give us, in the rest of this chapter, he's going to give us 3 things that being a loved child of God actually means for our lives. What does this mean for our Monday, for our Tuesday, for our everyday life, for our relationships, for how we live? And he's about to give us 3 things. And actually, the truth is, this is what this entire second half of the letter is about. This is all that he's talking about. What does this, knowing this, what does this look like in our lives? But in chapter 5, he narrows it to 3 things. And he's going to talk about sex, money, and our words. Let me read it. He goes on right after these verses, live a life of love because Jesus gave his life for you. He gave himself up as a pleasing aroma to God. And he goes on and he says, let there be, this is what it means. Not everything, but this is where it starts. These are just 3 things he's talking about in the letter. He says, let there be no sexual immorality, impurity, or greed among you. Such sins have no place among God's people. Do you see the identity piece there? He's bringing it in. Why not? Because they're not to have place among who you are, God's people. He goes on and he says, obscene stories, foolish talk, and coarse jokes. These are not for you. Why? Because of who you are. Instead, he says, let there be thankfulness to God. So what does it mean to live as a child of God? What does it mean to not just know I'm a child of God, but what does that mean in my everyday life? Well, 3 things he points out here. It means that sex is not something that is harmful to myself or others outside of God's design, but something that is beautiful and life-giving within it. It means that we are generous and loving and giving towards others. It means that our words do not tear down, but they are good and they are full of grace. He says, you are a child of God. And the reality is that has real implications for how we live. Because what you do is informed by who you are. It means something. It does. Being a child of God means something. And here he says it means something for our sex lives. It means something for how we use our money. It means something for how we use our words. It matters. It means something. And so he starts here. This is what it means to be a child, a loved and welcomed child of God. That he loves you and he gave his life for you. And he wants the best for you. And none of it makes sense without that. And so he goes on in this letter. He says, first thing I want you to know is you are a child of God. And then he goes on and he gives us a second thing about our identity now in Jesus, about who you are. And he says this, for once, in verse 8, for once you were full of darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. So live as people of light. For this light within you produces only what is good and right and true. And the second thing you got to know in Jesus as who you are people of light. That is who you are. As a follower of Jesus, you are people of light. Yeah, we used to be in darkness. But even though we didn't deserve it, even though we did nothing to earn it, Jesus opened the door for us. He shone his light on us. Even though that you and I were in our mess, even when you and I could do nothing to help ourselves, Jesus came in and he shone his light. And you got to get this. You are not the light in yourself. I am not the light in and of myself. We are the light because we have the light of the world. Because when we were in the darkness, because when we couldn't do it ourselves, because when we were in our mess, he shone his light. And it says when he shines his light, it makes you a light. He brought light into our darkness. And you know what that did? It changed our identity. It changed who you are. You, follower of Jesus, are people of light. That is who you are. And so what does this mean? What does this look like in my life? What does this mean for us as a people, as a church, as followers of Jesus? Well, he goes on and he says in verse 10, he says, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. Take no part in worthless deeds of evil and darkness. Instead, expose them. What does he say? He says, living as people of light means you are no longer taking part in what everyone else is taking part in. You can no longer take part in what everyone else is, in what everyone else is doing, and where everyone else is going, and what everyone else is thinking. And we no longer take part in everything that we used to. That what comes from your life as a people of light is different than the world around you. And I want you to see this in the context of the whole letter. And hopefully you've been on this journey with us, and hopefully you've been reading it. But if you haven't, what he's been talking about, this is what the whole letter is about. What does this mean practically? What does this mean for how I live? I want you to see it in the context of the letter. These are the things he's been talking about. He's been saying, what does it mean to live as people of light? Well, it means instead of division, there's love. He talked about that in the last chapter. Instead of greed, this chapter, there's generosity and giving. Instead of lying, there's telling the truth. Instead of rage and anger, there's peace and compassion. Instead of stealing, there's giving and working. This is what he's been talking about. This is what it means to live as people of light. Instead of hatred, instead of division, there is make every effort to stay united. What does it mean to live as people of light? It means that we do not treat each other and the world and ourselves the same way that our world does. It means that we can shine in here because we are unique. Because when there's division, we make every effort to be united. Because when there's greed, we are generous. Because when words are hurtful and hateful, and here they are full of grace. Because we are people of light. Why? Because we have the light of the world. And this is what I need you to get. I need you to get this. I need you to get that this does not just happen. We as the church, and you might have learned this if you've been around church for any amount of time, you will find that the church is not just going to live as people of light by accident. It doesn't just automatically happen. It's not something that just happens on accident. The truth is, to live this way, to live as these kind of people, we can't live on accident, church. We have to live on purpose, okay? If we are going to really live as people of light, we have to live on purpose. We don't just go with the flow. I love this verse. He says, what does he say? How does this verse start? He says, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. How do you live this way? How are we going to live this way? We don't live on accident, church. We don't just go with the flow of the world. We don't just go with how everyone else is acting, with how everyone else is thinking, with how everyone else is talking. We can't. We cannot, because of who we are. We cannot just go with the flow. We have to live on purpose, carefully determine what pleases the Lord. How do you live as people of light? We don't just walk in step with everyone else. We walk in step with the light of the world. And that's Jesus. That is Him. And this is what it means to be who we are. To live as people of light. And this is our calling, church. So many people I talk to and meet end up so hurt and disappointed by the church, because often it can be exactly like everything and everyone else they encounter. Gossip, bitterness, unforgiveness, whatever it, all these things, these are all things he talked about in the last chapter. How we use our words, how we treat each other. Money, our ethics, all of the above. And the truth is that hurt is warranted. Because we have a new identity. Because in Jesus, we are not the same. We do have a calling. We do have a high calling, church. It is to be children of God. It is to be people of light. This is who we are called to be. We are not here. We have purpose, church, and I just want you to see this. Throughout this letter, the writer is trying to give purpose to the church. We're not just a Christian country club. We're not just a group. We're not just a clique for insiders. We aren't just us and no more. We are called to live out an identity as a community, as a people together. This is more than a once-a-week event that if you're a Christian and you do, that's just what you do. We have a calling, church. Anthem Church in 2022 has a calling. You in Jesus, I want you to hear me. You have a calling. You have a purpose. Your identity is set in Him. Your purpose is set in Him. It doesn't matter about how you feel, your performance, or how other people make you feel. Your identity is you are a child of God. You are a person of light. Church, we are people of light. Not in and of ourselves, not because we are going to be perfect, but because we can be humble. I was having a conversation with my daughter the other day, and my 4-year-old, and in our conversation, I was trying to teach her how to be selfless. We just had a little situation. We're kind of going through like that stage in development where we're trying to teach her to be selfless, to be generous, to give, to sharing, the whole sharing. If you're a parent, you know the sharing stage. And so I was having this conversation with her, and I was teaching her, and I was trying to tell her about being generous, about being selfless, that we don't want to live for ourselves. And I was having this conversation with my 4-year-old, and then it hit me. all of a sudden, I had this thought in my head. And the thought was, man, do you know how far you have to go with that? I was teaching my daughter about selflessness, and I had this thought. I was like, man, you're trying to teach her, and you know how far you have to go. And in that moment, I paused, and I just looked at her, and I was honest with her. And I got to share with my 4-year-old about, you know what? I'm still growing in this too. This is something that I want to continue to get better at. This is an area where I want to be more generous. And I was able to just open up to her, and I was able to be transparent with her. And in that moment, I'm like trying to give her a lecture. If you've ever given a kid a lecture, or if you have been a kid receiving a lecture, you know the look. It's like, yeah, I'm not hearing a word you say. Like, I don't care. You can talk for hours. I don't care. You know what I mean? I was that kid. We all were. Unless you're like perfect, like my wife, but she was always attentive and perfect. I was like, I don't care, Dad. Like, say everything you want. I needed prayer. But in that moment, I was talking with my daughter, and I started to be honest, and I really did open up with her, and I brought her in, and something changed. Like, something about her demeanor, about how she was paying attention, something clicked in her in that moment. And she started asking me questions when before it was just like literally like she should have just had her hand up. But she started engaging and asking questions. And I started thinking, Lord, you have called to us, because this is confusing to me if it is to you. Lord, you have called us, this group of people right here, me, who is broken, imperfect, who messes up all the time, who says the wrong thing accidentally, who does the wrong thing, who hurts people, who messes up. You have called us to be your light, to be these kind of people. How? How are we to ever live up to that? How are we to ever be who you've called us to be? I don't see it. We're broken. This community is not perfect, nor will it ever be. There's things that happen. People will look at you wrong. People will say the wrong thing. We're not perfect. And in this moment, in the conversation with my daughter, I felt the Lord tell me, it's because I'm not calling you to be perfect. I'm calling you to be humble. I'm calling you to be honest. I'm calling you to be transparent. Not a light of the world who thinks they're holier than everybody else, who thinks that you're right and everybody else is wrong. No, but a light of the world that is transparent. A light of the world that fights for unity and love and honesty, that you're willing to talk about, as Paul says, boast about your weaknesses. We don't brag where we get it right. We brag where his grace has found us, all right? That is what it means to be the light of the world. Paul, the writer, in another letter, he says, I don't boast about my strengths. I don't brag about where I'm good. When I'm around people, you know what I brag about, he says? I brag about my weaknesses. And if there is a people that can be honest about his grace, where he's found you, where he has loved you when you didn't deserve it, when he has kept you going, when he was faithful, when you were faithless, it is us. People of the gospel, people who have said that we are only Christians. Did you know that it is only possible to be a Christian when you realize and are willing to admit, I cannot do it myself. Jesus, I need you. Did you know that there has never been a Christian alive that was not the case for? Every Christian begins not with "this is how I'm good," but it begins with, "Lord, I cannot. I am not good enough. I cannot on my own." This is why he calls us to live a life of love, because we have been loved, and he gave his life for us so that we could, by his grace, by his pure mercy and love, have this new identity. We don't boast in our strengths, we boast in our weaknesses. This is what it means to be people of light. This is what it means to be the church. This is our calling. And he includes here, and we can have the band start coming up. He includes in chapter 5, right before he ends this little section that he's writing, the author, as he's writing chapter 5. Right in the middle of this chapter, he includes what most scholars agree on is a song. Is a song that the church would sing in the first century. And they would come and they would gather and they would sing this song. And the song is the one we read. It says, "This is why it is said." And the Christians would come together and they would sing, "Awake, O sleeper, rise up from the dead, and Christ will give you light." They would sing this because this is our story, church. This is the story of God. This is the calling and the story of every person who has ever been a follower of Jesus. We were asleep, but we have been raised to new life. We did not deserve it, but Jesus shone his light in our brokenness, in our mess. And this is what I need you to hear today, that Christianity, the scriptures, and all the calling of God make no sense without first this experience in your life personally. It makes no sense acting like a child of God without this experience where you were asleep, where you were sleepwalking through life and you felt God in a moment, through a season, bring you back to life. You have witnessed his light shine upon you. Nothing else makes sense until you encounter God. Until you have this moment with him where it's not just a mental agreement to some belief, but to where something on the inside of you is transformed and your identity is forever changed. That's where it begins.